So I really wanted to start by kind of laying out front what we're talking about when we're talking about introduced, or another term for that is non-native grasses. Bermuda grass, pictured in the bottom right-hand corner there, is a big one that we get lots of questions on. It seems to a lot of people are trying to get rid of nowadays. Um, and there's also one that I've heard several people over the years say, well, that's just that native Bermuda grass. None of the Bermuda grass varieties are native. They've all been introduced primarily for forage and erosion control and other options for like that. Old world blue stems is another big one throughout the state. That's kind of a catch-all term to include things like Clayburgh, King Ranch, Angleton, Yellow. Most of these have been done primarily for forage production and erosion control historically. Again, another set of species that is sometimes referred to as native just because they've been around for so long, but none of these old world blue stems are native to the area. Most of them originate from Asia and Africa. Some of the others you see listed, Johnson grass, Klein grass, those are pretty common throughout the whole state. Some of the others that are a little bit more regionally specific, buffalo grass is a big one in South Texas, parts of West Texas, Bahia grass for you folks in East Texas, and then layman's love grass and Willman's love grass as well. So all of these are non-native or introduced grasses. Most of them have fairly poor habitat requirements for wildlife. They do have their specific uses, but if we're looking to return things back to kind of historical or native habitats and native grasslands, we need to look at getting those out of there. So what in general makes this such a difficult process? It really comes down to the fact that all of these species were introduced because of very specific reasons and they fit specific needs. For example, Bermuda grass, one of the things that makes it such an outstanding competitor, I would say, is that it can self-prune. In other words, it can cut itself off of tissue that has been affected by, say, herbicides or mowing, preserving the root mass and being able to regrow. Buffalo grass has dormant buds in the plant base, which again, give it the ability to regrow after having sort of an initial herbicide treatment. Johnson grass has the ability to produce roots and produce new shoots from different parts of the plant. So disking in that situation may not be the best option. In general, all of these species have the ability to produce extreme amounts of seed and extreme amounts of biomass with very little moisture and an extremely quick amount of time. So now that I've given all the doom and gloom, the good news is that this can be done. We have shown on several occasions that we can convert these areas that have been dominated by introduced grasses back to native habitats and native plants. Now, the kind of 4 things that have to be taken into account when doing that is you must be diligent in the process. You can't just get this started and then halfway through change your mind, think, well, I'll get to it later. The series of steps that I'm going to talk about, you've got to stay with the process. Secondly, it's not necessarily going to be cheap. Unfortunately, we don't have a silver bullet at this point, a one-time treatment, something that this is just going to be an easy fix. Again, as part of being diligent, you can't just do it halfway. If you're going to commit to the process, you've got to be fully committed. And then finally, scale is important. Unfortunately, at this point, there are introduced grasses pretty much across the landscape. And what that does is almost creates a constant source of these species to invade our native grasslands or our converted areas. So the larger the scale that you can undertake this process, the better off you're going to be, because you're going to limit that edge in that area that those non-native species can reintroduce. So how do we go about doing the process? Well, the first thing that needs to be done is you need to remove the existing vegetation. And there's several different ways that that can be done. And I'm going to go into each of these in more detail in subsequent slides. Then we want to make sure that we're killing and removing the the plants that are currently there. Third, we want to mine that seed bank. We want to get rid of all of the seed and other potential plant material that's still left. And then finally, replace what we got rid of with what we would prefer to have in a more desirable species. So removing the existing plant material. There's several ways we can do that. As I had in the previous slide, fire is an excellent way to do that if that's available to you. It's a cheap, inexpensive way to remove all of that built up biomass and existing plant material. A couple of options that you can do depending on the equipment you have, or if you have grazing animals available, is you can cut and bale that vegetation. That could provide an income stream for you throughout the process, and is an excellent way to remove all of that biomass that those plants have built up prior to starting the process. Using livestock to graze the grasses down is another excellent way to be able to remove that standing material that those plants have produced. The whole reason for wanting to do this is that we want to start treating those existing plants and getting whatever treatment we're going to apply directly to the root mass. If not, you end up with a situation like you see in the bottom right-hand corner there, where that disc just started rolling over the plant material that was there. We're not really contacting any soil. We're not treating the bases of those plants. We're really just balling up and dealing with biomass that's above the ground. So once we get rid of all of the above biomass, then we want to start treating the root and the plant material that's there at the ground level. Mechanically, how we can do that is through disking. There's a lot of different discs out there. They each have their pros and cons. One that I like to mention that a lot of people are often scared about is moldboard plowing. That's received a lot of bad attention historically, but if available, although slow, this is an excellent way to be able to break out some of these areas that have had non-native grasses on them for an extended period of time, and as a very effective way at controlling those existing plants. If we're going to use herbicides, which is an excellent route to go as well, would suggest using some high rates of broad spectrum herbicides such as glyphosate. What we really want to make sure we're doing is using that herbicide directly to that root mass and treating those roots. I really can't say that enough, and that's really a big deal with all of these non-natives that have large amounts of built up biomass. Additionally, don't be afraid to use species specific herbicides. Johnson grass is one that comes to mind. There's several products out there that are developed and specific to Johnson grass and are very effective on that. Some of our other woody species may need to use specific herbicides to treat those, along with some of the other more broad spectrum stuff to be able to treat the whole area. Arsenal products, Powerline is one of the common names or trade names that's often used. There's a lot of research out there that those products have been used in the past that are broad spectrum and can be highly effective. However, I always like to voice some caution about using that product or those types of products. They have shown to be mobile within the soil profile and have shown to, in certain soil types, have extended control, therefore preventing anything that you would like to reestablish in those soils. Some other things that you could kind of tie in to doing this conversion as other activities are going on your property, brush work that's been done. If we're getting in and we're mechanically treating brush, whether it's through root plowing or methods like that, that's an excellent start to this process. Those are definitely some of the mechanical ways that can treat those existing plants for you, or energy development is another one. These are these are both starting points that can be used that aren't necessarily targeted at converting non-natives, but can definitely be a way to jump you into the process. So after we've controlled the plants that are already there and already established, the next big thing is we want to do what we call mining the seed bank. As I said, all of these non-native grasses are exceptional at producing seed. You can see in the picture up in the right-hand corner the amount of old world blue stem seed just laying on the ground. As you can imagine, if that stand's been there for a long time, the amount of seed that is in that soil. So what we're looking at doing here is through either a series of disking or broad spectrum herbicides, repeatedly treating that site for several treatments after subsequent rainfall events. Now, every time I talk about doing this, everybody wants to say, well, how long do I have to do that? Unfortunately, I can't give you an answer and I can't give hard timelines on that. It's really going to depend on rainfall. You know, what you're looking at doing is after we've treated that initial vegetation, allowing that site to receive rain, allowing some of that seed to germinate, and then treating it. And every subsequent time you're doing that, you're reducing the possibility of having that seed germinate and the number of non-native grasses reestablishing. One of the things that we've seen a lot of people run into as we talk about this is the kind of go too far mentality. And they'd like to wait and treat that site until they absolutely see no more seedlings coming back. You really can't do that realistically. There's always going to be, not always, but for a long period of time, there's going to be seedlings coming back. So we want to shoot for 3-4 times. You can kind of gauge it based as you see those grass seedlings decrease. But at some point you have to make a decision. Okay, I'm going to do my seeding at this time and go ahead and make the call. I talked about being diligent and not being able to go halfway. These are some pictures that came from some colleagues working with South Texas natives doing some restoration work in and around the Choke Canyon area. The picture in the top left corner is an area that had been treated 2 or 3 times using broad spectrum herbicides after they had treated the initial existing plants. However, there was a sprayer malfunction that had left the area, the taller grass that you see in that picture, untreated for one treatment. The picture in the bottom right-hand corner is directly adjacent to that had that previous treatment. So you can see pretty quickly how that thing can get away from you if you're not able to stay on top of it. When we're replacing things, we want to make sure we leave those final 2 applications for an herbicide application, so we allow that soil to firm back up. You can kind of see the difference in a too soft soil in the top left and a firm soil in the bottom right. Alternatively, you can use some cover crops or lease to ag producers to help mine that soil for you to save some costs. And then after we've mined the soil, treated the existing plants, we want to replace that with appropriate, locally appropriate and site appropriate native vegetation. There's a lot of folks out there that can help you pick those different species, and I've included a link to our seed selection or seed mix selection tool on our website. And then just real quick, and I'm glad this one's kind of short because this is the part that we know the least about, is the management afterwards. Possibly shortly after, you could do some mowing to treat some annual weeds if they become a problem. Grazing is always the one big question everybody has. Again, no timelines can be really given here. It's going to be rainfall dependent, but we really want to allow those native species to go to seed before we put any grazing in. And with that, thank you.